All right, we're back. Issues with live TV, live event with live shows. You can't avoid them, so that does, you do have to deal with whatever comes along. And I believe we left at we left 15 minutes ago. Came back. It's been about 15 minutes. There were some issues that I had to deal with, some technical issues. But I'm back anyways, and we're going to continue on. And I was talking about how now that we want to take a look at some of the consequences of the involvement of atheism in society, because it does not necessarily talked about as much. And in there, we can actually take a look at some of the involvement of science. We're particularly looking at, we're now taking a look at psychology and psychiatry. This is, we're taking the point from Freud and his nephew, Edward Bernays. These seem to be the two most fundamental psychologists around. And when I'm saying fundamental is that they've had the most impact in our society, whether we know it or not. Freud obviously was the one who he influenced a lot of other psychologists. Most of the psychologists we know today have been influenced by him, or have had some degree of influence on them. So he's considered to be the father of psychology. His nephew, Edward Bernays, his sister's son, took psychology in a completely different direction. He gave us, in many ways, he's the one who gave us our modern world. If you wonder, you can talk about consumerism, you talk about conspiracy theories and propaganda, public relations. This is the work of Edward Bernays. And he deserves all the credit, good and bad, for this. But we will, right now we're just simply presenting the ideas. We will go into these ideas a little bit later on to show that these were not necessarily his own ideas, but things that, they were done before in history, but you had them now being reapplied under new terminology. In other words, in many cases, if you want to understand how something's working or is supposed to work or why it doesn't work, go into history, and more often than not, you'll find something very similar to it. And if you can understand why back then it didn't work, you'll understand why it's not going to work now, or produces the results it does produce. And this is sort of the same thing here. You're stuck in quantum mechanics, or you're stuck in physics, and you want to move forward. Some of the best ways of doing that is to actually move backwards and see what was done before. And as you go back and see what was done before, you take a look and see where their mistakes were, where their things they didn't understand. And then from there, you try to, if you can find the points they don't understand, or the things they missed, more often than that, that's where you're going to find your new discoveries. That's where you're going to find your new understandings. You're looking at the anomalies, the things that sort of didn't make sense in their experiments. And that's where you go back, that's where you take a look at, and that's where you sort of begin to try to expand on, if you can do that. There's no guarantee that you are going to be able to do so, but if you don't try, you don't know. But there's no way of knowing without trying, sort of. And this is sort of what we can sort of see with Edward Bernays. We can sort of see the sort of, as society develops, this whole concept of Freud's concept of the bewildered herd, the masses, which is often referred to in Karl Marx's book, The Opiate of the Masses. Not the book, but the concept of opiate of the masses. And this kind of, you can see it in Karl Marx, who was an atheist. This whole pitting of religion against the so-called enlightenment of atheism. what he did is he called religion the opiate of the masses. This is Karl Marx. That religion pacifies a person to the point where there is no resistance. And the thing is, well, this is can be said for religion. It can be stated, but because we've seen this in history, we've seen how this works in history, but it's only to a certain degree, and there's only a certain degree of effectiveness to this, because not everybody is convinced that an idea that the public accepts is a particularly good one, and these form a dissonance. As the establishment, whatever the establishment is, or the established thought, presents itself as the norm, and again, most people accept it as the norm, there are always going to be people who are falling off the edge. There's always going to be, you're at the edge of society, somebody falls off, of course, the person who is behind you, that's what you're on the edge of society. You fall off the edge of society into this oblivion of non-existence according to the society. That's basically individualism. Well, the person who was behind you is now on the edge. And as the edge continuously shrinks, the social circle shrinks, more and more people fall off the edge. And as more and more people fall off the edge, you now have the recipe, the makings for a revolution, because the establishment sees themselves as becoming a minority. As they see themselves becoming a minority, they become fearful of the crowd, right? The bewildered herd. They're afraid of a stampede, and they start behaving in a very, what they term, a draconian manner. And this is a term I think you should look up, you should research and find out where that came from, because it's an interesting term to be used in this situation here. It's actually the opposite of enlightenment. Instead of being enlightened now, they're very dark-minded, they're very fearful. And the new knowledge that they thought they were bringing forward is no longer what they thought it was. And as they see change occurs, they see themselves being swept out as change comes in. That change in many cases comes from outside, but what happens, the desire for change from the outside is fueled from the inside. As the inside collapses, the outside rushes in to fill the void, and the cycle begins again. This is human history. You can go into archaeology, you can go into anthropology, and see this. You can see this time and time again. You can see established thought be replaced with something new. And if you study the established thought, you find that the established thought was not specifically overthrown, but rather it decayed to a point where there was no more resistance, and essentially the system imploded. And as the system imploded, the outside rushed in to fill the void. This is the mechanism. This is, again, you can see this in history, you can see this in archaeology. So, again, not necessarily a Freudian concept, not necessarily something that originated with Bernays, but something that was certainly used, re-recognized, and then manipulated by Bernays to make himself a small fortune. So he died a very wealthy man. I don't know how happy he was, but he certainly died a very wealthy man. And if you look at the wealth, in some cases, look at wealthy people, they're not specifically happy. That their wealth does not specifically make them happy. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to have wealth, but it's not going to be your recipe to resolve personal issues. It's just going to make your more immediate life more comfortable. That's about it, and more comfortably physically. How you feel on the inside is something completely different. Now, they assume this was one was synonymous with the other. No, if you felt good on the outside, then you feel good on the inside. So you had a lot of parties, you had a lot of whoop-to-do's, and a lot of we call positive affirmations. This is actually coming back. This is anyone who thinks that positive affirmation or thinking positively is new. It's not. It's something that's always coming back again. Ironically enough, as the psychologists were failing in their work, they weren't able to get anywhere. There was another group beside them, also from Germany as well, who believed that man was chemically based. That all of our emotions and everything were defined by our chemistry. That who we are as people was a result of breeding, and that if you had the right breeding stock of people, that you could create a better race of human beings. And this is actually practiced. This is in practice to the degree where you actually had, in order to keep the genes pure, you had family members marrying each other. So you can understand now where that leads to, right? If you understand the genetic issues that we do not understand that occur with inbreeding, then marrying your own kin, marrying your own family, even if it is so-called keep your genes pure, particularly if you're talking about royal families, is a recipe for disaster. And in many cases, that's actually what did happen. So you had a lot of insanity, you had a lot of madness, and as they went to cure this, they said, well, yeah, man is chemical, but maybe there are problems within the genes that were there that were just sort of hidden. So maybe we can sort of change the chemistry of the brain. If you're talking about a chemical imbalance, I know, in other words, the behavior of schizophrenia, a person who is an alcoholic, and so on and so forth down the line, these things are issues of chemistry of the brain. They're chemical imbalances. Again, you're hearing this today because the old stuff is coming back again. They couldn't cure it with psychology, with the environment, with talking to the person. So they said, well, let's try the chemistry now. And that's when they began experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs like LSD. LSD and acid and a lot of these hallucinogenic drugs, including magic mushrooms, came out of these university research labs, the chemist labs, particularly in association with psychiatry. These were the psychiatrists. These were the experimentations that were going on with the psychiatrists. And the psychiatrists actually took the drugs themselves. It wasn't just simply that they gave them to the patient. They were trying them out themselves to see what new wonderful worlds were coming out of this. And this was something, if you read, Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is about this type of experimentation. Alice in Wonderland, I can't remember the time period, but it's around that same. It's early on, but it's around that same period of time when they really began the experimentations on drugs, on the chemistries of the chemistry that you brought into your body. This experimentation was going on. As a matter of fact, this is what actually Frankenstein was all about. Frankenstein was about this sort of search for the chemistry of man, to find the energies of life, the electricity of life. This is where you had electricity being brought in. So now you had two versions of man. You had chemical man and you had electric man. Electric man was run solely by electricity. You had a sort of chemicals in there, but the chemicals didn't really matter. You needed to have the electricity. That didn't really seem to work out too well. They couldn't raise the dead. That was sort of Frankenstein's goal. And so now the question came down to chemistry. Could you raise the dead with chemistry? And so the initial step into this was somewhat comical, but this is where you had that period, in the early period there, you had universities paying people to go into the graveyards and start stealing bodies. I mean, this was where the science was going. This was the science, or should the fruits of the science of atheism. So atheism and socialism was a science. You wanted to create a better society. You want to engineer a better society. You better start going in and digging up the dead so that we can go back and start experimenting on the bodies. And a large chunk of the bodies in Oxford and a lot of the schools in Europe are bodies that were stolen from graves. This is how medical schools began. This is how the dissection on the cadavers began. It wasn't a sanctioned practice. It was something that was illegal to do. And so it had to be kept hush-hush, and there was anything that needs to be kept hush-hush or top secret. Well, that's how your secret societies form around them. So you had a society of surgeons. They wanted to learn and practice their craft. What do? You create a guild, you create a society, and you swear your members to secrecy so that you can keep doing on what you're doing, although it's illegal. And now you have the formations. You can understand the formation of secret societies that are eventually connected to the Freemasons, to the Illuminati, and eventually form the Bilderbergs. Again, the Bilderbergs are not necessarily the first societies. They are a resulting society of earlier societies. So, nice bit of information there. So, anyways, I'm going to leave this here. It's almost time to go to you now. I'm not going to be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is going to be my day off. I've got some other research to do. I'm not going to be in the office at the time. So there is no broadcast tomorrow night. There's no broadcast on Saturday night, neither on Sunday night. I will be back Monday with a new set of notes to continue our discussion here. We'll go further in our discussion on here. But actually, we're going to go further in our discussion on You Now. If you look in the description down below, you will find the links to where we're going. In fact, I will post them now in the chat so that you can see them. So here's where we're going. Yeah, we're going to You Now right now, and then at midnight we're going to Twitcasting, and so I will see you there. So anyways, good night. I have some things to sort of fix up a little bit before we get there, and I will see you on You Now. We'll probably end up doing a Q&A over there for a bit. All right, take it easy.